What's up, everybody? It's Man of Low Moral Fiber here. My name's Luke, and this is going to be a compilation of 5 different kills against 5 different raid bosses here as Zero. We're going to be taking these raid bosses on in order, starting with Terramorphous, followed by Hyperius, then Pyro Pete, Voracidous, and finally the Ancient Dragons of Destruction. Starting here against Terramorphous, which is the raid boss from the main game, I am going to be using Fire Lyudas, a legendary B shield, a legendary slag bouncing Bonnie in order to keep Terramorphous slagged, which is somewhat difficult because he does shed slag pretty easily, and because of that it can make it difficult to get a good time on him. Luckily I do get good slag luck in this particular video. I am using a Chaotic Evil Rogue Comm to boost both my fire rate and critical hit damage. The first Lyuda I use is a Raz Res Lyuda, that is the critical hit damage accessory, and then from there on in I use the Gromki Lyuda. This is because the Raz Res does slightly more damage before you have built up any more critical ascension stacks, and shortly after that the Gromki will begin to do more damage. This kill takes approximately 35 seconds and is better than any other run on Terramorphous at overpower level 8 that I have ever had, and so that was pretty cool. I'll give you a quick look at my gear and skill build here after we inspect the loot pile, which really contained nothing too spectacular, and then we will eventually move on to Hyperius. So like I said, we didn't get anything special from this loot pile, but while I was farming Terramorphous, I did manage to grab a couple pitchforks and also a legendary bouncing Bonnie grenade. Unfortunately, it was in shock element, which I truly didn't find that useful. However, it was perfect stats, which is obviously just up to luck, but it was nice to get that lucky. So, like I said, here's the gear and skill build that I used. You'll notice for this particular kill, I am spec'd fully into Velocity. And that's because Terramorphous is so far away that you can still get the B abuse with the pellet split. In fact, it helps to have Velocity because that will put your pellets closer together and hopefully you'll be able to hit multiple critical hits with one shot, which can truly make a big difference. Now, obviously, the strategy I'm going to employ against Hyperius is much different. In fact, we're going to be using a Twister shotgun. We could have easily used a Pimpernel sniper, but the Twister is, in my opinion, the easiest weapon to bore Hyperius with. The kunai, probably entirely unnecessary, but I did want to throw a few different singularity grenades there to pull the bots in really close to Hyperius. And with this particular method, you can kill Hyperius in, very little amount of time with almost no effort involved because of the way bore works. So now we're going to get started here against Pyro Pete, the Ultra Invincible. The first thing I do against this guy is get him slagged and then knock off his face shield with a Trespasser. Managing to knock off his face mask in one single shot makes a big difference in the battle because then Pete will run at you with his arms down, which will enable you to get a number of critical hits immediately off the bat, and it will also allow you to really use the extra damage from the B shield to wear down his shield extremely quickly. Obviously, upon wearing down his shield, he will go into his double element Nova, and at this point you can either try to hide behind some scaffolding if you're close enough, but I find that I had better results speed-wise just to sit here and then use the non-B boosted Lyuda to go ahead and finish Pyro Pete off. Now, here we are taking on the raid boss from the 3rd campaign DLC. This is obviously the toughest raid boss in Borderlands 2, and because of that, I definitely took some time to pre-stack a rather large amount of critical ascension for this fight. Otherwise, it would be virtually impossible with Sniper Zero, probably bordering on the line of actual impossibility. I don't think it would be possible with the low amount of ammo that you can actually take into the fight. So what I'm doing is just using the massive amount of critical ascension along with a Fire Lyuda, Firebone of the Ancients, and Legendary Sniper Comm to do as much damage to Voracidous as I can. You'll notice that Voracidous does shed slag extremely quickly. I take this time to again use the Trespasser to kill the Chief. I used it before, obviously, to knock off Pyro Pete's face shield, so the Trespasser is an invaluable weapon for a couple different raid fights, which is strange because its overall utility in the game, other than these particular fights, is nearly minimal. And so, Voracidous has died here, and like I said, he is the toughest raid boss. Unfortunately for us, he dropped the Hawkeye, which I do not consider to be an extremely powerful sniper, especially in comparison to the other Seraph weapon. He can drop the Interfacer, which is obviously a very top tier shotgun. Anyway though, it's always nice to kill Voracidous because like I said, he is extremely difficult. So now we'll be moving on to the 5th and final raid boss I'm going to kill in this particular video, which will be the Ancient Dragons of Destruction. I chose not to include Master Yi and Dexi for obvious reasons. Both of them would probably take longer than these 5 kills spliced together like this, and I also chose to disinclude Craw because I personally don't like him very much. You'll notice I dropped my Shockbone of the Ancients there, which is actually a necessary step to get a good time here against the Ancient Dragons of Destruction if you are going to be using Critical Ascension. It's worth noting that going into a menu to change your Bone of the Ancients, or any item in general, would immediately deplete your Critical Ascension stacks to 0, which is obviously undesirable. So that is the reason in which I dropped the Shockbone of the Ancients there on the floor. I do manage to kill Helianth pretty quickly here. Theoretically, I could have killed Helianth in this first magazine, but unfortunately it doesn't go that way for me. Still managed to kill Helianth though before I take damage, and I'm actually able to get Brood down pretty quickly as well without taking too much damage, so that my B-Shield will actually be charged up here by the end of my Deception, and I'm able to take him out. In case you're curious as to why I don't like Craw, I've never been a fan of boss fights where instead of fighting the boss, you're basically dealing damage to the boss in between running from or dealing with a massive amount of smaller enemies. I've always found that to be extremely poor boss design, and as a result I don't very much like the Craw fight. Plus, all of the best times against Craw, no matter what character you play, because of his particular mechanics and relative ease to actually hurt him, are all going to be approximately 2 minutes and 25 seconds or somewhere around there. And because of that, I do not find a kill against Craw to be compelling for any reason. I do have a Craw kill on my channel in case you want to watch it, but I'd recommend not, because basically he's a poor raid boss in execution design and all other design elements. So I'm not too interested in showing him in this particular compilation, which I consider to be good raid bosses. Even Pyro Pete is better than Craw. So we'll go ahead and look at the loot explosion here. I thought they did a nice job here at the end of the Dragons with the really cool explosions and drop of loot. I thought that that was well done. So as always, guys, I do thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet taken the time to subscribe, please do so. I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I do hope to catch you next time. Bye, guys.